Hey, welcome everybody. This is Arjuna Arda, and I'm really delighted to be in conversation today with Chris Jackson from Unity on the Bay. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Definitely is, definitely is. We had a wonderful conversation already, which is what prompted us to do this live conversation today. And as I remember when we were talking with Joe and Hal and Sandra and others, we were speaking together about the transformation of leadership, particularly around spirituality, awakening. You're the leader of a church. Let's continue that conversation now live. What does it mean? How has the role of a leader changed from, say, 50 years ago or from 100 years ago when we had the minister or the pastor? Today, I think spiritual leadership has gone through quite a dramatic transformation.
It truly has, I believe. There was a time when an inspired individual would receive an epiphany or an awareness and then begin to share it with others through their word and through the actual example of their own life. And then people would gravitate toward that person, believing them to have some special dispensation from the divine or something that they didn't have. And what I see so different today, and what I really appreciated about your book, one of many things, was that model is changing now. I remember in 1989, I was praying that I wanted to be a great spiritual leader. And I always tell people to reconsider that prayer, because I had a certain idea of what it meant in terms of being this benevolent force for good on the planet. What I didn't realize was that it really means the spiritual leader is the one who says yes to allowing everything they believe themselves to be stripped away so that they can begin to express beyond definition. And to me, that's always a place that's full of humility and compassion.
Yeah.
And that individual would never for a moment consider themselves to be under special dispensation from God or different from anyone else. They would in fact really see themselves in everyone.
Absolutely. It was interesting you said somebody claiming to have a special dispensation from the divine, which they don't have. And I think we could even tweak that and say, not just which they don't have, but maybe we could even say which nobody has, and this is, I think, the question, because, and this is the big dialogue that I think is going on now among Christian people to understand Jesus's words in a refreshed way, because Jesus is reputed to have said, I and the Father are one, and I am the way, the truth, the life. Now, did he mean I, JC, the guy who lived in Jerusalem all those years ago, or does it mean that the I amness, the I-ness, the pure subjectivity in each of us is actually the portal into divinity? In other words, when Jesus said, I and the Father are one, was Jesus the great exception or the great example, And this leads to a whole different way of seeing leadership. I also see that we've seen a big transformation with the Pope. The previous popes I've known in my lifetime were really talking down. We had a German Pope previously who was really speaking from an elevated place. And now we have this beautiful man, at least I think he's very beautiful, Argentinian St. Francis or Pope Francis, who really feels like one of us. He feels like he's really wanting to connect as a brother, as a fellow human being. So I think this is really where what we used to be looking up for somebody to have a special dispensation. I think now we're learning to trust transparency, honesty, where actually someone who admits to their own weaknesses may be more trustworthy than someone who pretends to be holier than thou.
Absolutely. And holier than thou is, from my perspective, one of, if not the most dangerous places for anybody to live, because it seems to me like the universe is becoming less tolerant of hypocrisy. And I think that's a good thing.
Hallelujah. Yes. Hallelujah.
So I'm grateful for that. I must say I didn't enjoy the process of getting to this place a whole lot because, as I said, it wasn't what I expected, whatever space or place I'm in right now. But I thought it was about putting something together and it's really about taking something apart. It's taking apart the self that I have understood myself to be. And with regard to what you're saying about Jesus, from the unity perspective, we would always say that there's two names there, Jesus and Christ was not Jesus's last name. Christ was the state of consciousness or awareness or realization that this man attained. So when he was saying, I am the way, from our perspective, it would be that state of consciousness is the way, and it's attainable to all of us.
Right. And I think, the big question comes when we talk about attainment. I think that's something you and I could possibly jive about a little bit, whether it's really an attainment or more of a relaxing, but that's a whole different conversation. Yeah. But the question is, whether it's an attainment or a recognition or a realization or just a relaxing and letting go, whatever that is, what then is left of our humanity? Now, this is the big question, I think, you see, because the model that I grew up on, both within my Christian conditioning that I was born into, but also later in the kind of gurus that I listened to and teachers, there was this idea about enlightenment that when you somehow attain or go beyond or whatever, then the ego is eradicated and you become somehow, immaculate or infallible. Now, what I've come to discover in my nearly 60 years is that actually the opposite is the case, that we always remain fallible as human beings. We always remain prone to our little foibles and our weaknesses. The difference is not whether you've dispensed with it, which seems like a dangerous assumption. The difference is whether we're honest about it, whether you can wear your absurdity on your sleeve for everyone to see and realize, I'm just this guy, but look how great the sky is, right? Look how great the mystery is. Don't look at me, look at the mystery. And that's a very different relationship with a leader, that we recognize the leader as pointing us towards something vast, which we can discover within ourselves. The leader is not pointing the attention towards themselves as some kind of a reference point.
Absolutely. And that's a huge difference, I think, between pretending to be something that we're not in terms of beyond our humanity or beyond our foibles, as you say, and recognizing that as authentic human beings, faults, frailties, virtues, and everything, that by presenting that, we create, I believe, a more credible source toward the moon, or finger pointing in the direction that we want to point in, as opposed to having people get caught up in us because therein the danger lies. And it's inevitable to a degree, but I try to do everything I can, and I'm sure you do too, to help people realize, don't look at me, look at this, this is what it's all about. And this is yours as much as it's mine, this state that we can attain and this peace that we can enjoy.
Yeah, that's actually, it's interesting you speak this way, because my story is that 25 years ago, I lived with my teacher in India, Punjaji. I don't think maybe it is just long enough. I lived with my teacher who's sitting here. And he didn't really have a teaching. He didn't have a dogma. He didn't have an ashram. He didn't have anything to join. He just had a question. And the question he asked was, who are you really? Who is actually experiencing this moment? Very powerful question, because it pushes the attention back to find out who is really here. And he then asked me to teach. He said, now you go back to your country and share this secret with your friends. And for a few years, I did conduct what is known as satsang. It was a way of passing on this inquiry to other people. But what I discovered was that however much you say, don't look at me, look at the truth, look at yourself, somehow the very theater of having somebody at the front of the room in that position, the very theater suggests specialness. So what I ended up doing in 1995, after a few years, I turned this into a coaching school, which is that book you have. Now, I don't really teach as a teacher anymore. I train other people to facilitate awakening with each other, which is a purely 100% democratized approach through awakening.
Yeah. I hear you loud and clear. Sometimes I wonder about that, actually, because I do still stand in front of a crowd. And I do think that the very arrangement itself lends people to look at you and lends people to see you as an authority over and above their own inner authority. So I do what I can to distract it. There are moments when I wonder if the very setup itself isn't a little contradictory to what I'm trying to tell people. So I appreciate that you went through that.
Well, you know, you and I being on the call today, having this conversation, you know, you're the minister of a big church, one of the biggest unity churches in America. I don't know what I do. I write these books, right? But
you're a wonderful author, and you're, for lack of a better word, you're a coach. I was going to say teacher, but you're a coach, and you're, I'm sure, a great one. But the book is a wonderful, wonderful tool, I think, to help people.
Well, thank you kindly. You know, thank you kindly. So here we are, two people who are, from time to time, in their own way, viewed as leaders, right? So I think something we discussed doing a few weeks back was, you know, we have the opportunity to dispel the myth of specialness or different, or being different, through honesty. So I'm kind of, and I'd like to lead the way with this, you know, because one thing that a leader can do is tell the truth about themselves, the truth that one might otherwise want to hide, you know. So I'm going to think for a moment, you know, as a leader and somebody writes books, what is the truth that I would most like people not to know about me, right? Because it's the willingness to tell that sort of truth that I think actually can dispel the architecture of hierarchy, which can actually be so damaging, not only to the congregation, but can end up, that hierarchy of difference can be actually very damaging to the leader as well, because it leaves us in an isolated position of specialness. So I think I'm going to lead the way with this and see if you want to follow suit. And this is what we talked about the vulnerability of leadership, you know? So I think one of the things that people look to me for and think that I've transcended and I haven't is stress. The feeling of having too much to do and a kind of vague sense of panic, like how am I going to get it all done? And I think oftentimes people look to me as a coach, as an example of somebody who doesn't have that. Right. And in fact, I find, you know, that is this balance of giving a gift in the world and remaining connected with that relaxed spaciousness, to me is, you know, it's an ongoing challenge that I don't even know if I will master it before I die. But that combination of fluidity, but also having things you commit to doing, and as soon as you commit to doing something, to delivering something, even if it's just your sermon on Sunday, you know, if you commit to delivering a gift to somebody, you have created therefore the possibility of stress. And that, I think, is the dilemma that we all face. You know, how are you going to remain as spacious as you do on a beach, but as focused as you do in your most generous moments without getting stressed? I think that's the piece that probably I feel most embarrassed about, is the fact that I get stressed. How about you?
Well, it's interesting you should ask. I'm just on the verge of wrapping up a silent retreat that actually, obviously, it's over, but the retreat is still going on, but I'm not silent.
You look pretty silent, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things I was working with was the concept I want to talk about on this coming Sunday, Easter Sunday, which has to do with the crosses that we carry in life. And so it's about identifying your crosses. And I thought, you know, dare I tell my congregation on Sunday what I perceive to be my crosses? And I want to, and I'm going to. But for me, I think the first one would be, even after all these years, and even after having just read your book and seen the same message again, it's not measuring up. It's still feeling like I'm not enough. And because it's such a deeply ingrained belief or conditioning inside of me that even when I think I've really gotten beyond it, you know, it'll just show up, and it's like, where did this old friend come from again? So that's the first one for me, is still the feeling that I'm not enough. The second one would be the feeling that everyone else should come first and foremost ahead of me because they're more deserving. So, and I find that's not unusual with people in the helping professions, that a lot of us got into this because we wanted to make everything okay for everybody. So I see those two in my life. And stress, I'm right there with you, my friend. You know, we live in a world where, I don't know if you feel this way, but it's almost like things are moving so rapidly. The information that's bombarding us is so great that it's inevitable that our stress factor be cranked up. And it makes it more challenging, but it also gives us a greater opportunity to bring the spaciousness and to commit to the spaciousness, even while we're stumbling in stress, not feeling as though, in my case, not feeling as though I'm enough, feeling as though other people deserve attention, energy, time, recognition before me.
Wonderful, yeah, wonderful. You know, as you speak in this way, I realize that, do you hear that? Oh, that's coming from you, yeah.
Yeah.
I realize a big question that many people have today is, who should I listen to? Who is it safe to listen to? And very often I see, I don't know if anyone else would see it this way, but very often I see that there is a kind of a polarized choice, okay? On one side, we see there are very charismatic, powerful disseminators of wisdom who appear to be incredibly confident, pumped up, you know, who've really got the answer to everybody's problems. And there is a tremendous temptation to want to follow somebody like that. A few decades ago, a lot of those kind of voices came from the Orient, you know, where
Yes.
somebody would appear from India and they would say, oh, you are only suffering because you are not enlightened. I am enlightened, I can help you. So there was a tremendous immutable confidence to that you wanted to go, somebody knows what's going on. But equally, there are seminar leaders who are, you know, pumped up and like, you just go for it and make it in, you know, where there's no chink in the confidence and self-esteem. So that's one kind of person you can listen to, somebody who seems to have every answer to your problems and doesn't really show any humanity, or that's not the right word, but who doesn't show any weakness or vulnerability. On the other hand, there are other people you can listen to who are so humble and so kind of ordinary that they don't really appear to be any different from you. And then comes the question, well, why would I want to listen to this person? They seem to be going through all the same stuff I am, you know? And I think this, broadly speaking, that does create a dilemma for people, is who should I actually listen to? And many times what happens is we get caught up. I don't know how true this is for your congregation in Florida, but many times we get caught up in listening to and following a high energy, charismatic teacher and later feeling disappointed. Or many times we don't listen to somebody who seems to be quite simple and humble because they don't seem to be any different from us, but actually they had gold for us in that ordinariness and in that humility. So I'm wondering if that kind of contrast of high energy charisma, I've got all the answers, to the humility of I'm just like you, if that contrast makes any sense to you.
It does. You know, I think, and I don't know what your experience is with this, but for myself, I have found, and I am at peace with the fact that I might not be the most popular preacher on the block. You know, for two reasons at least. Number one, I do not present, I don't think I present that sort of, you know, I can do anything impeccably kind of presence that's charismatic, charming, and everybody wants to follow. And because of that, I realize there are certain people that won't be attracted to that. I think that part of maturing, I'm going to call it spiritual maturity, over the years, for myself, I'll say, has really led me away from that kind of charismatic, I can give you all your answers, I'm the perfect human being and the perfect divine being. I feel as though it's taken me away from that to a place where I'm more interested in hearing communication from other people's heart and soul. And that I think is a smaller audience, very possibly. I don't think it has the mass appeal. And then the other thing is, there are people who are in a similar situation. They've been listening to all the authority figures that seem to have it all together. And as you say, it hasn't taken them where they wanted to go. And so it opens up the way for them to start listening to a softer voice.
I think this is very much the beauty and the benefit of us having this conversation together, is we're actually having as two people who speak and write, we're having a conversation about who should we listen to, right? As two people who people listen to, we're having a conversation about what are the qualifications to look for in another human being that makes them worth listening to. And let's dwell on that a little bit. What would you, if you were going to advise a close friend, who should you listen to? Whose books is it worth reading? Whose lectures is it worth listening to? Whose weekend seminars is it worth going to? What would you consider to be some useful qualifications to decide whether to lend your ear, and in a way to lend your heart to somebody else as a guide?
Well, the first thing that I would say would be to encourage the individual, himself or herself, to do as much inner exploration as possible, to find that voice within themselves that is always speaking but not always heard, that says, this is how you need to move, this is where you need to go, this is who you need to listen to. Because that will never steer you wrong. Once you have got a hold, to me, that's the core of the spiritual life and the awakened life, is that you have something inside of you that you can count on. And while the things outside of you may come and go, and they will, and they do, you've got this something inside of you that says, this is how I need to do the dance. This is who I need to listen to. And the second thing I would say is, I believe that when we come from as much the center of our hearts as we possibly can, then we have a natural resonance when we're in the presence of someone else who is coming from that same space. Doesn't mean they're going to be perfect, doesn't mean they're be sharp and charismatic, but there's something there that just says, I can trust this person. I need to listen to this person. There's a heart connection that has little, if anything, to do with the mind. Yeah.
Of course, it can be confusing. I think many people find it confusing because the heart connection, the heart is in its essence it's a completely innocent instrument, but it gets corrupted through layers and layers of conditioning. So many times we can think that we're following our heart and listening to someone, whereas in fact we may have been overwhelmed by being impressed by charisma. Yeah. Let me have a shot also at answering my own question, if I may, because I just thought up the question. I haven't thought up the answer yet. That I'm reminded, is that okay with you?
Sure.
I'm reminded of a time I went to a festival in Sweden. Big festival, it's about 1,200 people. I was one of the speakers there. And they brought in a monk, a young woman who was a monk in her early 20s. She had spent her whole life in India in a religious order. So she was a monk. You know what that means, a monk, So she sat up on the stage, namaste, she was very Indian. And there was a young woman in the audience who stood up, about 8 months pregnant. She had difficulty standing up. And she said, excuse me, I would love to ask for your wisdom, your advice about how to raise my child. And I assumed that this young monk, or nun, you would say, she actually called herself a monk, but she was a woman monk, so a nun. I would assume she would have had the intelligence and humility to say, I am totally not the right person to ask about that because I'm a nun, I've never even kissed the guy, I don't know anything about that. But lo and behold, she gave a lecture for like 10 minutes about motherhood. And I was sitting there going like, what is wrong with this picture? Why do we ask celibates about sex? Why do we ask monks about money? Why do we ask a nun about raising children? It's like, And it may seem stupid, but very often we end up actually asking questions of people who are charismatic. And I think the answer to my own question that I would give, is if you're going to ask anybody about anything, if you're going to seek for advice from anybody about anything, I would say the main criteria is, have they at some point faced the challenges that you face? So have they passed through the journey you're passing through? And do they display some sense of mastery, not in their words, but in the way they live, right? Now, for me, it's been a really, a kind of an honor and a pleasure to work with my friend, John Gray, who I co-authored this book with him. I have to actually unplug myself to reach it, but we just co-authored this book together, Conscious Men. John Gray and I wrote it together. And John Gray is a guy who speaks very well. He's very eloquent, very intelligent. But as I've gotten to know him personally, he's way more impressive as a human being than he is as a speaker, because he lives with such deep, unwavering integrity. He lives everything in his books, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He's living it in a very high integrity way with his wife, with his children. He's living everything he's talking about. And that, for me, that's what I would wish for anybody contemplating these questions of who should I listen to. I would wish that you could find somebody who is not just talking eloquently, but whose every moment of their day, in deepest private of their personal life, including their public appearances, including the way they talk with their staff and assistants, that everything they're living is somehow an accurate embodiment, not only of what they're talking about, but what you would like to aspire to yourself. I think there's so much more to be said about how someone is living than about the theories that they have concocted to explain things.
Yeah, you can become quite poetic and proficient about sharing spiritual principles. And it's a whole different story to live them. And
it really is, yeah.
And even if an individual, myself, for example, is not living in complete integrity with what I espouse from the platform on Sundays or in a classroom, or at least if they have the self-objectivity to be able to be aware of their own hypocrisy and to be aware of where what they're doing isn't perhaps in alignment with what they're sharing with the world, and has the desire to become more aligned.
Beautiful, exactly. So actually the integrity you speak about is the integrity of telling the truth about lack of integrity. You see, it's like if the truth is spoken, that is integrity. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to be honest to be qualified to speak.
Yeah. I think I was just reading something from Byron Katie on Facebook the other day, and it was something along the lines of when you look forward to being criticized, you're free, or something like that. And the reason that I mentioned it at this point is because I think when we can look at ourselves critically and still love ourselves and pat ourselves on the back, even for those arenas of our life where we're not in total integrity. And that's, to me, almost as important as living in complete integrity, is being aware of one's own hypocrisy. If you're aware of it, it's not going to sneak up on you. It's like, okay, I realize this and I'm working with it. So thus is back to our point about leadership is, I would never stand up on a Sunday morning and tell my congregation, I live in total and complete integrity with everything I share with you every week. But what I can tell them is that from the bottom of my heart and soul, that is my desire. That is what I'm aspiring toward. So I'm inviting you to aspire toward it with me, should you feel so guided. And then we walk together.
Hallelujah, brother. Hallelujah. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this time together today. It's really been a pleasure to get to know you better. It's
been my pleasure too, and I hope that our conversations regarding your possible visit to Florida in July come to a reality. It's been very nice connecting with you in this way.
I'm looking forward to it very much.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjuna. Thank you.